as a community of friends of Jesus as believers, and I know I can rely on each and every one of you to walk with me.
Pope Leo the Fourteenth, revered for his quiet strength and unwavering principles, has just ignited a media firestorm. During a ceremonial encounter with Duchess Catherine, he did the unthinkable. He refused her handshake. Tensions rose. Cameras rolled. But just as the room stiffened with disbelief, the Pope made a bold, unexpected move that turned a simple greeting into global speculation. No one, neither royals nor cardinals, saw it coming. Was it defiance? A message? Or something far deeper? You're about to witness a moment rewriting protocol, power, and perception. A visit rooted in legacy and change. Rome, eternal, weathered, unyielding. A city built on saints and emperors, where tradition clings to marble columns like ivy. Within its ancient walls, the Vatican has stood for centuries as the seat of spiritual power, its rituals woven into the fabric of global history. Here, papal elections are not just religious affairs. They're seismic events that ripple through capitals and palaces alike. But when white smoke rose above the Sistine Chapel and the name Pope Leo the Fourteenth echoed through the square, something unusual stirred, not because of the name itself, but because the man behind it wasn't European. He was American. Yes, you heard that right, an American pope. For centuries, the idea bordered on heresy in certain Vatican circles. Too modern, too outspoken, too unpredictable. Yet here he was, chosen above cardinals from ancient orders and royal bloodlines. Speculation spread like wildfire. Was this the Vatican's quiet rebellion against itself? Or was it divine timing? The faithful debated, diplomats whispered, monarchs took notice. After all, the monarchy and the Vatican have always shared a complicated waltz. Sometimes partners, sometimes polite strangers. From the Tudors to the Windsors, popes and princes have clashed and reconciled across generations. But never before had a pope with no noble lineage, no European pedigree, been handed the keys to St. Peter's. And perhaps that's what drew Duchess Catherine to Rome. Was it duty? Maybe. A gesture of goodwill from the House of Windsor to this new era of papal humility. Or was there something deeper? Sources close to the palace hint that Princess Catherine was intrigued, not by the pomp, but by the paradox. A pope who eats alone, sleeps simply, and shuns applause? That's not just rare, it's revolutionary. And maybe the princess, who has navigated her own tightrope between image and substance, saw something familiar in him. No official statement was released. No embassy escorted her. She came quietly, without ceremony. But make no mistake, this visit was personal. And as Rome's cobblestones echoed beneath her approaching heels, the world held its breath. But she had to see him. Not for politics, not for headlines, but for something deeper. Stay tuned. The handshake that was never exchanged. And so, as Rome braced itself for what felt like more than just a royal visit, the city's whispers met reality in a way that no one, not even Buckingham Palace, could have predicted. It began not in the thunder of crowds or the echo of cathedral bells, but in the quiet hum of a jet engine cutting through Mediterranean skies. Aboard was Duchess Catherine, Princess of Wales, poised, radiant, perfectly composed. She wasn't traveling with a full diplomatic corps, nor under the watchful eye of press teams. This wasn't a coronation tour, and it wasn't palace protocol. It was personal. On her lap, a handwritten statement was being carefully revised by her aides, a message of unity between faith and public duty, between sacred tradition and the evolving identity of the modern monarchy. Her stylist adjusted an ivory blouse and a string of understated pearls, chosen not for their opulence, but for their quiet symbolism. This moment wasn't about extravagance, it was about intention. What had drawn her to Rome wasn't a scheduled summit or royal obligation. It was curiosity, fascination. The world had barely begun to process the election of the new Pope Leo the Fourteenth, an American with no aristocratic lineage and no appetite for grandeur. It had only been 5 days since he stepped onto the balcony of St. Peter's Basilica, not in silks or jeweled vestments, but in a plain black cassock, alone and unadorned. Gone were the rings, the embroidered robes, the gilded thrones. He had chosen a wooden table for meals and a narrow cot for sleep, and in the hush of the Vatican's private chapel, he prayed not before cameras, but before God. The message was clear. He had not come to play the part. He had come to strip it down. Word of Duchess Catherine's arrival spread fast through the Vatican. No official channels had been used, no government announcement made. A simple request for an audience had come directly, unfiltered and deliberate. Behind closed doors, Vatican aides debated protocol, but Pope Leo, steady and unshaken, only said, "Prepare the room. No need for the press. The world will hear soon enough." And so, beneath centuries-old frescoes and beside crimson carpets often trodden by kings, the stage was set for an encounter no one fully understood. The moment Catherine entered, the room shifted. Cameras clicked instinctively, but the air felt heavier, unscripted, uncertain. She moved with practiced grace, her every step echoing confidence built over years in the public eye. Approaching the Pope, she smiled and extended her hand. "Your Holiness," she said, "it is an honor to greet you, from one public servant to another." But Pope Leo didn't move. His hands remained folded. His gaze, calm, unwavering, met hers with neither coldness nor warmth, just stillness. Her hand hung in the air between them, suspended by formality and intention. Then, as the seconds ticked by, her smile wavered, not from insult, but from something deeper. She slowly lowered her hand and whispered, "I see." And just like that, the script vanished. Without a word, the Pope rose, not toward her, but toward a modest table tucked quietly to the side. Upon it sat a basin of water, a clay pitcher, and a folded white towel. Rolling up his sleeves with the patience of a man unbothered by headlines, Pope Leo prepared for something far more disruptive than a handshake. What followed wasn't pomp or ritual. It was humility weaponized, diplomacy turned inside out. The question on everyone's mind: why? Why reject the hand of one of the world's most admired figures? Why break with centuries of tradition in such a visible, vulnerable moment? And perhaps the answer, if one dares to speculate, was never about rejection at all. But what hidden message lay in that silent gesture, so haunting it left Kate questioning everything? Stay glued to find out. A ritual beyond royalty. And in that delicate moment when silence had swallowed the room, something entirely unexpected began to unfold. Less about tradition and more about transformation. The world had watched closely when Duchess Catherine, the Princess of Wales, entered the Vatican's grand chamber with poise only years of public life could teach. But no one, not even her most trusted advisors, could have predicted what came next. All eyes had been fixed on the handshake that didn't happen. Yet it was the silence that followed which would unsettle headlines and rewrite assumptions. Pope Leo the Fourteenth, standing calmly before a silver basin, seemed almost immune to the tension gripping the space. With his sleeves rolled up and a stillness that carried centuries of meaning, he didn't offer words of greeting or formal gestures. Instead, he glanced toward the basin, then met Catherine's eyes, not with judgment, but with something quieter, something deeper. "You Royal Highness, I believe you didn't come for a photograph," he said, voice calm, unhurried, "and I didn't come for applause." The words landed with quiet weight. This wasn't diplomacy. It wasn't even a ceremony. It was a moment stripped of filters, and for someone like Catherine, who had met presidents, kings, and world leaders with polished grace, it felt strangely unfamiliar. She didn't speak at first. Her staff exchanged nervous glances. Vatican officials leaned slightly forward, unsure whether to intervene or simply watch. A journalist's pen fell to the marble floor, its sharp crack echoing like a question no one had dared to ask out loud. Then the Pope gestured gently to the basin. "There's a ritual older than any crown or throne," he said, "and I ask you, not as a royal, but as a fellow servant. Will you take part?" Princess Catherine hesitated, not from fear, but because this wasn't what she expected. It wasn't rehearsed. No royal handbook had prepared her for a public moment so personal. "This wasn't on the schedule," she said quietly. The Pope nodded. "It's not supposed to be." And that was when something shifted. She stepped forward slowly, her heels whispering against the ancient floor, and stood opposite the Holy Father. The basin shimmered beneath the soft Vatican light, humble, unadorned, timeless. There were no velvet ropes, no golden trimmings, only water, cloth, and centuries of meaning waiting to be rewritten. As Pope Leo lifted the clay pitcher, the gentle sound of pouring water filled the chamber. He dipped his hands into the basin with reverence, then looked up. "Jesus washed the feet of his disciples not out of duty," he murmured, "but to remind them, no leader stands above those they serve." And with no cameras instructed, no cues given, Duchess Catherine reached forward. Her hands moved with grace, but not performance. As she dried the Pope's hands, it was clear this wasn't about protocol. It was personal. Her expression softened, not out of weakness, but recognition. For the first time in her long public life, she wasn't acting out a royal role. She was simply present, a woman stepping outside of legacy into something human. Then the Pope gently took her hands, lowered them into the basin, and began to wash them in return. The very hands that had waved to crowds, held her children, written speeches, and symbolized modern monarchy, now rested in his. She didn't pull back. She let it happen. She allowed herself to be humbled, not as submission, but as connection. When he dried them, no one clapped, no one spoke. There were no headlines crafted yet, no royal statements issued, just a sacred pause, and the overwhelming sense that something important had just taken place, though no one could quite define what. The Pope turned slowly, his presence commanding even in stillness. "You may speak," he told the press, his tone gentle but absolute. And then to his aide he said, "Let them all enter fully now." The doors opened again, and yet the atmosphere felt completely changed. The press re-entered cautiously, almost reverently, as if they'd stumbled into a moment not meant for headlines, but for history. Beside him, Duchess Catherine stood. Not just a royal guest, not just a figure behind the flash of lenses, but something quieter, more grounded. Her gaze, once distant and ceremonial, now held a calm kind of strength. Though her hands were dry, something in her touch had changed. The cameras kept rolling. The flashes returned, but this wasn't pageantry anymore. It was something raw, unexpected, real. What message lingered beneath the ritual, and why was Catherine the one drawn into it? "Stay with us." The hidden message behind the Pope's silent refusal. And as the press slowly emerged from their stunned silence, still trying to grasp what they had just witnessed, the room shifted from stillness to inquiry. Journalists who had flown in from every corner of the world had expected drama, a symbolic gesture, perhaps even controversy. Instead, they found themselves in a moment that defied explanation. Notebooks remained unopened. Microphones, though switched on, were held still. It wasn't fear that kept them quiet. It was something far rarer in Vatican press halls: confusion wrapped in reverence. Elected in the unexpected 2025 conclave to succeed Pope Francis, Pope Leo the Fourteenth has defied tradition with deliberate silence ever since. When the first question finally came, from a French correspondent brave enough to rise, it was direct. "Your Holiness, was the refusal of the princess's handshake meant to reject her?" Pope Leo didn't blink. "Not a rejection," he said, his voice even, "but an invitation. In a world addicted to appearances, I wanted to offer something deeper. We've forgotten how to meet each other without performance." The reporters didn't gasp. They leaned in. Beside him, the Princess of Wales, Duchess Catherine, often known for grace under scrutiny, stood quietly. The cameras had captured her moment of hesitation earlier, but what followed was harder to script. She no longer looked like someone caught off guard, but someone emerging from it. Her gaze now seemed reflective, more grounded, as if the experience had stripped something unnecessary away. A Reuters journalist pressed on, asking Catherine directly if she had been offended. She smiled faintly, but there was no deflection in her voice. "Surprised," she admitted, "but not offended. I came expecting protocol. I left with perspective." Another voice, sharp and skeptical, cut through the respectful murmur. Was it staged? Symbolism for the press? Pope Leo allowed a pause, almost too long, before replying. Had we rehearsed it, it would have meant nothing. And still, no one interrupted. Catherine nodded gently. There's a difference between being caught off guard and being asked to think. What he offered made me uncomfortable, but that's where truth begins. We all play our roles, but sometimes the script has to be broken. By now, the woman once painted by headlines as polished, diplomatic, and slightly predictable had changed in the eyes of the room. This was not the same Duchess who'd arrived in Rome just days earlier. The edges of her public image had softened, not into weakness, but into something more sincere. Another journalist from Spain asked if the Pope's gesture had been about power rather than humility. The Pope didn't hesitate. "If humility feels like dominance," he said, "perhaps we've misunderstood humility altogether." That answer, gentle but unmistakable, quieted the room. It no longer felt like a press conference. It felt like an echo from something older than microphones and pageantry. As one Vatican insider later remarked, "It was as though we weren't reporting a story but witnessing one." A hand in the back lifted. "Why water, Your Holiness? Why that basin?" Pope Leo looked directly at the questioner. "Because water doesn't lie. It purifies, it equalizes, it carries memory. It's the first sign of life in every sacred text. If we can't stand at the same basin, how can we lead from the same well?" Catherine lowered her gaze, her hands gently clasped before her. Her voice was softer now, but full of clarity. "I didn't expect to be humbled today. I don't agree with every part of the Church's teaching, but my grandfather once told me, if your pride drowns out your conscience, then you're not leading. You're just performing." Would she have said that a week ago? Probably not. But today, her posture said everything. Cameras kept rolling, but no one interrupted her. The reporters had stopped chasing stories of political power between church and crown. They were witnessing something far rarer: stillness met with grace. Then, just when the silence seemed full to bursting, a voice finally asked the question they had all been avoiding. "Princess, would you do it all again?" Catherine didn't blink. "Yes," she said, her voice clear. Not because it was easy, but because it mattered. The Pope turned his gaze toward her, then to the room. "True transformation," he said slowly, "begins where comfort ends." In that moment, the narrative shifted. Headlines rewrote themselves, not around defiance, but discovery. Eyes turned to the press, and a new question rose. Is humility the new face of power? Keep watching. Curiosity turns to praise. As journalists react to Kate Middleton's bold move, and as the Vatican's heavy doors closed behind the moment that had just unfolded, what remained was not chaos, but a stillness that echoed louder than any applause. Inside the grand hall, the usual noise of camera shutters and shouted questions was gone. Journalists known for pressing hard and fast with commentary now sat motionless. The atmosphere had shifted from spectacle to something closer to reflection. This wasn't the story they came to cover. It was something far more elusive: truth stripped of performance. When a BBC reporter finally stood, her question was cautious but clear. "Your Holiness, some believe your actions today blurred the line between faith and politics. Was this a performance or a principle?" Pope Leo the Fourteenth, his hands folded and his gaze steady, responded without hesitation. "Faith is not a performance, and service is never theater. What happened today wasn't a show. It was a step away from it. If you're still awake at the end of it all and still feel the need to clap, then thank you. But the applause was never the point." Then his eyes turned to Catherine, Princess of Wales. She stood beside him, not as a polished royal icon, but as something more grounded. She didn't rush to speak. She didn't need to. There was no rehearsed smile or practiced pose, only calm, thoughtful presence. Another reporter stood a bit more boldly. "Princess Catherine, Was this moment meant to test your power, your authority? Catherine turned slightly. Her voice was soft but certain. It wasn't about power, but yes, it was a test of presence, not position. In that moment, I chose to show up, not to show off. A low murmur moved through the press. The room was no longer a platform for titles. It had become a space where identity, belief, and vulnerability collided. Another journalist asked whether the Pope's actions were part of a new Vatican approach, one more emotional, less formal. "This isn't diplomacy," the Pope said calmly. "This is discipleship. The Church doesn't deal in pageantry. It stands for truth, and people are tired of fake gestures, tired of pretending." From the back of the room, a question rose. "Then what does it mean that the princess accepted your gesture?" Pope Leo looked again at Catherine. "It means change is still possible, that even those born into palaces can choose humility. True faith doesn't ask for crowns. It only asks, 'Will you kneel?'" No one wrote that down right away. Some pens simply dropped. For a moment, the press was not reporting. They were witnessing. And then, Catherine's voice, now steady, returned. "All my life, I've been told that strength looks like perfection. But today, I learned something else. Strength without surrender is just fear in a beautiful dress." She looked to the cameras, not as a duchess, but as someone momentarily freed from royal expectations. "If anyone remembers one thing from today," she said, "let it be this. Don't confuse elegance with leadership, or confidence with conviction. I'm still learning. I hope I never stop." The Pope placed his hand over his chest and nodded. "Real leaders do not lead from far away," he said. "They walk beside." And today, the world saw that. Outside, the crowds had grown, but the mood was quiet. People weren't waiting for gossip anymore. They were searching for meaning. Inside, the story had shifted, and so had she. Kate Middleton and the Pope's silent display of true leadership. But just as the world outside buzzed with opinion within the old stone walls of the Apostolic Palace, something far quieter and far deeper was taking place. An aide stepped forward, ready to guide Pope Leo the Fourteenth and the Princess of Wales through separate exits. Instead, the Pope nodded toward a quiet side corridor. Kate paused. Then, without a word, they followed down a narrow hallway. They walked, no flashes, no whispers, until they reached a small, bare chapel. One candle flickered beneath a simple crucifix. No gold, no ceremony, just silence. "I wasn't ready for this," Kate said quietly. "No one ever is," Leo replied, kneeling. She stood behind him, awkward and unsure. "I thought I'd be the one in control." "You still are," he said softly. "But control of what? Applause or something that actually matters?" She finally sat beside him, slowly, uncertain. For years, she'd spoken of leadership and service. But here, stripped of cameras and expectation, she saw how tightly she'd gripped the illusion of control, while avoiding what could truly change her. The Pope reached into his sleeve, pulling out a simple olive wood rosary. "A mother in Palestine gave this to me. She lost 3 sons in war, yet she still gave something of herself." He pressed it into her hand. "I don't even know how to pray," she whispered. "You just did." She let out a breath, part laugh, part disbelief. "You surprised me. And you stayed," he said. "Most don't." She looked at him. "Why did you refuse my handshake? Why didn't you leave?" he asked in return. "Because it didn't feel like rejection," she said after a pause. "It felt like a challenge, and I didn't want to miss it." He nodded. "You didn't." Outside, reporters waited. Cameras rolled. But inside, something had shifted. No speeches, no declarations, just presence. When they returned to the hall, the mood had changed. A reporter called out, "Will there be a statement?" Kate looked at the Pope, then back. "Not this time," she said. "Not everything needs to be explained." And then, unexpectedly, the Pope extended his hand. This time, she took it, not as a royal, not as a symbol, but as someone who stayed when it mattered. But what do you think really happened in that chapel? Could it be a power play? surrender, or something neither expected? We'd like to hear your take in the comments. And don't forget to like and subscribe.